So hello, I'm Katy Donoghue, Editor-in-Chief of Whitewall magazine. On behalf of Whitewall, I would like to welcome you to the 5th annual Lexus Art Series, Art and Innovation Talks by Whitewall with Design Miami. And to our panel today, where Africa is at the forefront of innovation in design and creativity, looking at emerging talents leading the conversation in art and design in Africa today. We are thrilled to be joined by the panelists here. We have Nicole Nomsa Moyo, an architect and urban designer focused on human-centered design. Tosin Oshinowo, a Nigerian architect, creative entrepreneur, public speaker, and author, principal of CM Design Atelier. And Siyanda Mbele is the founder of Pinda, which creates handcrafted furniture and objects inspired by the uniqueness of South African culture. So thank you all for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
having us. Great.
I'm always really keen to ask designers and architects where their first kind of interest or experience of design stem from, and then how that kind of inspired you to become designers and architects yourself. So I'd love to hear from each of you on that.
So I guess in my case it was a personal experience. It's quite common in Nigeria well, maybe a lot less now, but there was a period where it was very common after you have your home. Most people who move to the city will always build a home in the township or in the village where they grew up. It's almost sentimental. It's almost your retirement space where you go back to. So when my father was having his build, I was particularly interested. My sisters were not. I was clearly a very spatial child, and I also excelled in art. So it was a very natural progression that, okay, I had an interest in space. I was very active in the development of the house. I followed him to sites, and I just thought, this is so great. And, being able to see 4 walls go up and think about the occupation and what you put where, here and there. And I was very interested in, the patterning of the floor. It was a very natural progression. So from a very early age, and this all happened when I was about 12, it was very clear that this was going to be the direction I would go in. But this was for architecture. But product design in itself was something that I picked up in the process of studying architecture and understanding human occupation, and also now the ergonomics of sitting on a chair and your relationship to surfaces. So that came actually when I started studying the course, and then that's something that I decided to carry on moving forward.
For me, it's very similar to Tosin. I was definitely exposed to a lot of great design build growing up. My grandfather, actually, he was a builder, and my father's an engineer, but decided he's going to be an unlicensed architect. So the beauty of having or working in developing countries is that you're not always limited by all these rules and regulations. So I joke and say, until now, my family home doesn't have any house plans because it's constantly evolving. So just architecture in general has been at the forefront of just development in our household. And I say this in a very positive way, because you can't really get into any profession without being exposed to it and understanding the works of it. So very privileged in that sense. And I can't lie, I watch the Home Network as well. I watch Property Brothers. I watch DIY things. So scraps in our house were always made into a chair that I'd make my parents sit on when they got back after work. There was paint on the carpets. But it's a real mix of art and science, and that's why I love it.
For me, it was my older cousin who used to draw. So he has a really great talent of just illustrating. He has, like how you would do like an Adobe Illustrator cartoon or whatever. He could draw that just with his hands without even referencing anything. So I used to see him draw and just watch him all the time. And this one time back in the 90s, I think, or early 2000s, my dad was leaving, going to a party. And before he left, he said to my cousin, please give Siyanda a pen and paper so that he can draw with you. He always watches you draw. And then he left, and then he gave me a blank piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper, and he gave me a magazine, and he was like, pick whatever you like in this magazine and then trace it. And then he showed me how to trace. And then I traced whatever figure I liked from then. I think it was a human being, because he always used to draw artists like Asha Raymond and all these big hip hop artists. He used to illustrate them. So I also followed that. I drew a human. And then as time went on, I realized I actually liked drawing cars. And then I started drawing cars. And then from drawing cars back in school, we used to draw Pokemons. And then I went on to drawing Pokemons and Dragon Ball Z. And then so it kept on just adding up and adding up. And my other friend used to draw houses. So I could see he's interested in houses. And at that time, I wasn't interested. For me, houses were boring. I didn't go that route. So I continued drawing cars and trying to now not stop tracing, and now starting to design my own cars. So I think back then when I was in primary and high school, that's when my conceptualizing started beginning, because I started conceptualizing my own car designs. And then went on to high school, did mechanical, because I was convinced I was going to become a car designer at the time. I think a year or two into studying mechanical technology, I realized this wasn't it. After that, I was just registering for university. I was looking for anything that would allow me to draw. So I was looking for graphic design, interior design, anything that could allow me to draw. And luckily, graphic design didn't take me in, and then interior design accepted me. And then after that, I joined in interior design, and I like the ability to now, I had this thing where I could now sketch something or whatever, and then it will be a 3D object. So this idea of my sketch now becoming a 3D item, and then this 3D item is going to be used by people within a space, became super exciting. And then after I graduated, I realized within the industry in South Africa at the time, there wasn't enough like authentic South African products that reflect South Africa and where we are, or basically Africa in general. Most of the stuff were basically imports that were coming in. So that was my first, basically, also I did design in Memphis Meets Africa, and I think that exhibition on its own was what started my love for basically creating African inspired designs.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would love to hear from each of you. Siyanda, you sort of touched upon it a little bit, but like how you from that first inspiration now, how do you define your practice now? And I think, Siyanda, you touched upon this a little bit, but having furniture design that was actually inspired by place. I know, Tosin, you're really well known for the Maryland Mall in Nigeria. That was you said that it's the first indigenous designed space that's like that. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you define your practice now, and what kind of how you could have defined your mission.
So I think I think also when I think about the content, I think about being Nigerian, I think about being a Yoruba girl. I'm so conscious of identity and finding yourself and yourself in your work. My studying of architecture, my education was in the UK, but I have such a true calling towards modernism. I think it's such a beautiful period of history, and how much of the world changed to what we experience today was set up on those principles. And I think also a lot of West African architecture that we see today is based on modernism. That period of moving from colonial to independent governance, and the style of architecture that came with it that was very conscious of the climate in a modern day context. And a lot of my work has been influenced by that period. And so I try and carry that period forward in my language as an office. I'm very conscious as an architect to design buildings that are appropriate for use. And being appropriate for use does not always mean it has to have a physicality in that sense. But the way I use space, or the way my people use space, is very different than it's used in the West. So for example, it's, a kitchen is always put at the back because of the kind of food that we eat and the kind of oils, the smells, we don't do open plan. And even in situations where you have open plan, it's for sure open plan. There is a back kitchen that does the real cooking, You know, security is a big challenge. So, you know, the master bedroom always overlooks the front for security purposes. So in terms of how a vernacular style of building or a setting would have existed, that use of space actually is now carried across in a very modern day context. So if you're paying attention, you start to see these nuances, but they're not physical. They're how the spaces are congregated. But in terms of style of architecture, I'm very conscious to try and push the boundaries. Now, the reality is, living in Africa, when you look at economies of scale, economies of build of countries, we're kind of working within a lot of limitations. I don't get to use steel to do amazing cantilevers because nobody can really afford it in this environment. How do I create an architecture that is distinct, has a strong language, appropriate for environment, and stands out? And I feel that I've been able to do this significantly with color, with planar surfaces, and conscious emphasis on plays of light. So my architecture is very clean. I would like to, I tend to coin it African minimalism. I'm very conscious to have planar surfaces, emphasis on light, textures, materialities, tectonics play a very significant role in my work. And particularly for Maryland, where I was working with a developer, and usually with developers, you do have limitations in how far you can go because everything is really based on a very tight budget. By using a very simple element of just black, we were able to completely change the language of the space. And because the building had such a strong mass, that really came across. Now, my work as an architect is very clean and plain and almost allows you to be able to use it as a blank canvas for other things. My work in product is very different because that's really where I use my culture, celebration of color and patterning, and you know, in a completely different context. So it's almost like I'm able to create a planar surface, and then I've got these pops of color that can now be placed in it. I think that's how I'm able to think about it, and it allows me to explore two different parts of my mind completely independently, and I can really go off and it doesn't have to be a struggle. There's no tension because I get to do completely different things with color. But then when I'm dealing with the planars of architecture and the simplicity of form that I think is appropriate for this environment, I get that flexibility to live in both worlds.
Thank you. And how about Nicole?
I just love hearing from both Tosin and Siyanda, but I'm totally different because at the moment I am my own practice. I have these parallel worlds where I'm practicing as an urban designer, and there's a lot that I consume within my workplace that is, you know, that pertains to the environment that I'm working in, and it's great. However, the practice of myself in which I get to do literally whatever I want is the most exciting. And I'm still finding my steps or my place in this. But I think at the core, which is again, the meaning of my name, which is victory of the people, to me, it doesn't really matter, you know, where I'm designing or what I'm designing. I always look similar to Tosin, the environment is critical, the community is critical, the culture is critical. How am I retelling that story? I'm also really ambitious in my approach to design. I won't only focus on the project. I'll look at the micro and macro impacts of the project. Always remembering that, yes, we are smaller communities, but we are part of the global community. So I always focus on problem solving. You'll see in a lot of my projects, you know, whether it's Miami Design District or Ukubuta or commissions for Frame Magazine, you know, they are very contextual, but I'm always bringing global issues back into the conversation of design, kind of doing a loop of storytelling, identifying crises that are that exist in the world, whether it's poverty, lack of water, sanitation, things that we don't necessarily like to address in design, but making those things really beautiful and telling that story so that we can get the right kind of attention and address these things in a more positive way. So I think, you know, it's great to hear where everybody else is in their practice, and I'm going to poke questions at them later. and I can't wait to open my own practice. But I am the practice at the moment, and it's been great. I can go on for hours about, you know, my design principles, but uh, at the end of the day, you know, humans are not necessarily at the center of design. They're a huge part of design, but identifying the human in the context of the environment, understanding our relationship to nature, and always addressing the hugest issue in my mind, which is the poverty levels internationally. You know, it's always this focus that, like, oh, in Africa, oh, I found that issues in Africa or India or China are equally as relevant in the Canadian context. If I look at First Nation communities or Indigenous communities, they're living in terrible conditions. So how do we bring that African message or that other message into the Western context and deal with it in the same way? How do we get people's attention through design? So I'm excited to go on that journey of advocacy through design.
I love it. Thank you so much. Siyanda?
For me, I think also when I started, it was first, it was just like introducing African patterns into products, and that was just like the launching, you know. And then after that, it was like, but there must be depth into this. It mustn't just be aesthetics. What's the next thing that I can do? And then I started taking the pattern, and then it started to inform the form of the furniture piece. So how it will be shaped is now determined by the patterns that are selected. And also now I started diving in deeper with what does the symbol of the pattern mean, you know? So I started looking at the symbolism and the meaning behind the symbolism. And then I started creating stories around that symbol and how it can relate to the furniture piece. For an example, with even my Mbele desk, it was also basically Zulu symbols that were basically taken together, and I created an analogy between the way people are so married to their careers and how these Zulu symbols were also showing how a man and a woman, when they come together and they marry, the symbol changes into this. So there's a symbol for a man and there's a symbol for a woman. And basically when they get married, the symbol changes into a particular symbol. So that particular symbol started to inform the shape of the furniture piece and how we spend so much time at work on our desks and how we are now married to our desks and the work that we do. And it was quite interesting because even though there was a huge European response, you know, where people from Europe were relating to the furniture piece and the pattern that were on the furniture piece themselves. And then back home in South Africa, people could now start to identify and they could connect with it at a personal level. And they could start telling their own stories. We would see their grandmothers were weaving, they were doing beadwork, and their grandfathers were doing ceramics. And also now with the line of work that I do and my approach, it now starts to allow for us to now look at ancient techniques, manufacturing techniques that have been thrown out the window since now everything is being done by machines. So what this does is people who are now unemployed and sitting in the rural areas with the actual skill to make can now come back and participate into this global design industry, where else now the industry had kicked them out because now machines were coming in, but now basically that. And also we were working on a project with Unandos, and basically it was for Constitution Hill in Johannesburg, which was basically a prison back during the apartheid times. And we basically had a tour around the Constitution Hill. Now it is a court. There's a court now, and it's also a museum. So we were basically assigned to design one of the spaces there to turn them into a meeting lounge and an events lounge there. So also they saw that I use a lot of African storytelling with my symbolisms, and I create these analogies, and they wanted that same approach, now taking actual South African history and depicting that history into an interior space. So I think those are the projects that we like, that are quite close. But as an interior designer, a client will come through and say, hey, design my bedroom or design my headboard, and I want it slick cut, and that's it. And it doesn't have to do with any patterns or anything. They just want a square headboard, and that's what it is. And they want a couch over there and a mirror over there, and they want to walk in and walk out of their bedroom or whatever, or even if it's an office. So it's a mix. It's a mix of the passion projects that we love, and then also the other client projects also that we love that don't require or not necessarily need the African patterns in them, but they basically need the interior design expertise. So that's what we basically do.
Thank you so much. I'm hearing from all of you about this kind of idea of using material or color or pattern, symbol, beauty, even to showcase a message. And I think that's just such a really interesting idea. I'd love to hear from each of you how you approach material, whether that's in relationship to sending a message, or if it's problem solving, or if it's related to context. I'd love to hear from you about what material considerations you make. And perhaps Tosin, we can start with you.
So this goes back again to this idea of the limitations of the environment. And I think initially when I started practicing, I used to get a bit frustrated because, I mean, we do live in a global world and we are all exposed to the same things. I can see beautiful buildings, in Miami. I can see beautiful buildings in London. I know that in many situations, some of these materials, I can't get to use in Nigeria. They just don't exist in this environment. To bring them in is so expensive. How do I still try and create what I understand or what I would like to evolve as good design within a local context? And the irony of it is I find myself evolving designs and doing amazing detailing based on the fact I have these limitations. And I go back to this idea of modernism. In the early days when prototyping was done, things were detailed per project as opposed to standard details that you can procure and things just slot together. When you don't have the luxury of being able to just get standard details for manufactured products, you have to be inventive. You have to look for interesting ways to create the illusions or the details that you would like to emulate or push in your designs. And it's not necessarily a situation of trying to necessarily replicate. We're technically always doing bespoke per project. Every project is bespoke because literally I have to sit with the metal bender to get the detail for the overhung sliding door, because I know I can't get the track locally, but I know I want to have this beautiful illusion because this is what's the most appropriate for that space. So you're constantly prototyping and being one and very conscious with these materials is actually quite refreshing. I like the fact that I have that freedom within the irony of this limitation. So the other thing that is quite constant, particularly across West Africa, is the mass of concrete. Everything is done in concrete. It's really the material of modernism. It's allowed the world to evolve physically as we see it now. How do I, within the limitations of concrete, be able to still create texturing? Something that's is coming across now in Nigeria that we will probably see a lot more of is using the existing soil condition mixed with concrete to create pigmentation, taking us back to the vernacular materiality that would have been the mud hut, that texturing you get of laterite. These things are now coming back in. We're looking at, okay, within the limitations of what we have, how can we push these things forward in a modern day context? And that's why I find myself working particularly with the materials I have to hand. Yes, there'll be certain things we will always still have to import glass, aluminum, but within, you know, the opportunities of wood, we have so many local woods, and different woods have different colors, different textures, different properties. For example, in Nigeria, Eku is a brilliant wood to use outside. Akala has a lovely lighter feel, which is great for furniture. And understanding all these different woods and the materialities and using them appropriately and combining them in projects, and then combining those with interesting plainer colors. I get a lot of joy with being able to work in that kind of context. And also knowing that anything I need that is within these materials, I can definitely source. If I plan ahead smartly enough, I can get the wood dried in time. I can get exactly what I want. I can get this soil condition that's going to work best with for my rendering of my walls. So, like I said, something that I initially, in the frustration of starting practice, thought, oh, I can't really, it's difficult because I can't get this exactly, has actually been the reason why I've been able to really birth and thrive. I've been able to create skylights that ideally I should have to buy a dormer window for. I don't have a dormer window, but I've been able to beautifully detail and still create the illusion that I want and still get the amazing light into the property, you know. Whereas if I had known that it was just easy to just do a schedule and send it off to dormer and then they send me back a manufactured version, I would have lost some opportunities of growth. So it's been very interesting in that context.
Nicole, could you share your approach to material?
Sure. I think I just loved just the notion of your limitations driving your design and seeing your limitations as an opportunity. A lot of my projects are very different. For Design Miami, as an example, and let me backtrack a little bit. Budget plays a huge role in material selection. So I remember initially, imagining all these great things. As a designer, you're like, I'm gonna use this and that, and it's all gonna come together beautifully. And I remember getting a quotation for my design, and I think it was like 30 times above the budget. And so very, very quickly, I had to scale down and ended up using fabric in a very exciting way, you know. So I look at fabrics. I think what's really important to me is how can the community get involved in the construction? So what skill sets does the community have in the context of the project, where they can contribute to the creation of the materials, so that that identity is not just visual, but there's a sense of ownership for whatever the design is. So that's really important to me. Another really important thing about materiality is sustainability. Whatever I can recycle, whatever can be reused or repurposed, plays a huge role in my material selection, because I'm always thinking about how can, you know, even a brick or a bottle, or how can this find a new form in this design? How can we, you know, take from the environment, but also take from our pollution, to repurpose and create a new story through this texture, through this fabric. I'm also like Tosin in the importance of vernacular architecture, like celebrating that. Even with one of my designs, Ukubuta, it's inspired by Zulu architecture, where I don't even want to say Zulu, because so much primitive architecture uses sticks and, you know, their immediate resources for construction. But rethinking about, like, okay, how do we transform that specific material into something that's more sustainable, that is structurally sound. I'm also really into design builds, or DIY, as I mentioned earlier. So how can we construct this and then break it down again? So I really like to think about the flexibility of materials in my design. But yes, it's very exciting that selection process. That's the fun part.
And Siyanda, can you share how you approach material for the objects and furniture that you create?
When we started, it was what would basically look good. And also when we started, the budget was mad tight. So it was what can we afford to, when you go to the store to buy materials. And then from then it went into what is durable. And then durability started becoming way more important than the aesthetics. Because if it's not durable, you cannot then maintain the aesthetics. So that is basically the driving force for everything. When we design, what's going to last and what's going to be basically durable to last forever. Because some of the stuff that we do, it gets sent out throughout South Africa, Africa, and the rest of the world. So we don't want it when it arrives there. And it basically, because we've had situations where material just, when it gets to another place, it acts up. Especially solid wood, where it can start to expand and do what it wants to do. So, so I think for me, it's always about durability. And then with that specific durable material that we have selected, can it also still translate the design that we want to achieve? So for me, that's just like the simple process that we have. Otherwise, if we're trying to create a bespoke item for a specific client, if they also say they like a certain texture or this is a certain item that they like, then we really try and work with a specific material for them for that custom piece that we're making for them. But also still keeping in mind, will it be durable? And then basically that's just the easy way we do things. Yeah.
Hearing from you, I love this idea that there are these maybe constraints that perhaps at first probably might have been annoying or difficult or challenging, but that you're able to then innovate because of them and kind of use them actually as a strength. And then there's that idea that like applying that elsewhere. Like Nicole, you were saying, this doesn't just apply to the continent, it applies to places like Toronto or anywhere else in the world. And I think especially now, one, that we're forced to be local. I'm sure that it would have been difficult for anyone anywhere to source things at this time because of travel restrictions or whatnot. I think we're thinking more locally now, but also we're thinking more sustainably. So I think by nature, your practices have a lot that internationally architects and designers can learn from. I'd love if any of you could speak to that.
Well, I think I kind of remember this note that you had sent, and you know, how does, because we're all Africans, which is awesome, how does African design start to kind of influence the rest of the continent? And for me, the most exciting thing is, you know, we've got 54 countries, we've got thousands and thousands of tribes. That means thousands and thousands of cultures and aesthetics and thought patterns that have been untapped, right? There's this thing about, you know, and it's I live in the West, so I can't speak badly of it, but there's this thing of, you know, there's this Western culture that we kind of all slip into, but there's so much to unravel about just the continent. And so I think we're only starting to scratch the surface of the potential of art, design, architecture, science, in how that can start to impact the rest of the world. Like we've started to see it come up, like it's always been our time, but we start to see it come up in, you know, these major artists borrowing ideas, I'm going to say borrowing ideas from African designers. And I hope that it's not just boring, but becomes a collaboration, the same way the West collaborates within the continent. I'm hoping that there's more of a collaborative process that is sustainable over time, and we can start to see, you know, I love Toronto, but it's not colorful. You know, we're speaking about all those amazing or different materials. Tosin, in my mind, they're so limiting to the eye, you know, all this frame and steel structure. Like, great, we get to do mass production very quickly, but that sense of culture is lost in this capitalism that drives a lot of our environment. So if we could just kind of step back, and we see it happening on the African continent as well, but just stepping back and because we are at a time where we're allowed to hold the mirror to our faces. You know, we were constantly trying to catch up or fit in, but now we're at a time where we can be like, okay, this is who I am, and this is how I want to tell my story, and this is how I want my environment to look. So every time I go home, even something as simple as, I'm going to speak about taxi ranks. Like, we have all these, it's always, we have this new latest big mall, and you know, that you arrive at the mall, and I'm thinking about majority of the people that use that space, and there's no taxi ranks designed into the infrastructure of the mall, knowing that that is the community, or that is the majority of the population that will be using that space. So just breaking free of this notion of, you know, this copy paste, like, we need to break free of that, analyze the environments that we're in, and start designing for them, as both
I
of
want to
these fabulous
contribute to
designers said.
what Nicole has said, and I really believe that we are in a very interesting time on the continent at the moment, because a lot of what we have has been slow to move forward infrastructure, physical infrastructure, but because of the internet and social media and just general telecoms technology, there's certain aspects that have been propelled forward and are so far in advance. I mean, the tech scene in Kenya is so forward thinking. Even stuff that's being done in West Africa in terms of banking. My banking app in Nigeria is ahead of my banking app in London, you know, in the UK. So that already tells you that a lot of solutions to problems are being found on the continent today, you know, and that in itself is very interesting. And then when you think about the fact that physical infrastructure has lagged, there are a lot of solutions, or I won't say they're managing, but solutions to basic problems that have always existed in this environment. Even like if you look at some traditional spoons for the kind of food that's appropriate for its use, for the kind of cooking utensils, the pots, you know, if you look at I won't even call them vernacular, they're traditional cooking utensils in this environment, they still hold that power today with the way things are cooked, you know, and these are things that you can take them and you can still modernize those, you know, they're very, very, very practical for daily use. But because there's been an evolution or a design kind of propelment in other direction, people haven't realized what exists in this, in the context here. And I think because we now have technology has pushed us forward in that sense, all of a sudden people are beginning to see these things and see them in a new light. And so we're able to now evolve them in a modern context and also reach a market that normally would not have been privy to these things. And I think that's why this period in our history is so significant. And there is a birth of a lot of young designers who are very conscious of the opportunities that exist. They have enough exposure to see what's outside. They have enough local content to understand what's local. And they're able to now marry these two together. And it's so exciting. I mean, Siyanda, we would never have met in real life if not for social media. You know, I saw what he was doing with the patterning and I thought, this is so amazing. This is someone who is modernizing his culture. He's bringing it to a market that other people can see and appreciate and aspire towards it. You know, it's no longer the vernacular in a textbook from yesteryear, you know. And you have to also remember that because of how we've gotten here, you know, we were almost forced to, okay, we need to move into this modern world. Your culture is traditional. This is the modern day context. But all of a sudden now we're taking our culture with us on this journey. And we're being able to sell it to another market, and the market is appreciating it, you know, and then we're also influencing it further, you know. So it's a really, really interesting time.
Just to also add on to that, for me, with my background also being a lecturer, I think also universities play a critical role and basically enforcing a creative confidence within students to basically be proud of who they are and their identity. So the content that universities are basically teaching students should be basically contextual information that they can now take from their own roots and from their own cultures, and then start to expand on that. And I think with quite a number of universities here in South Africa, they're starting to decolonize their curriculum, and they are now starting to look into how can they maybe move some of the stuff from the Bauhaus, and then how can they add to the stuff that South African and African designers are currently contributing to. So the students who are going to start coming into universities now, they're going to be studying the products and the interiors and the architecture that we are now doing. And that's what makes it quite an exciting time. A friend of mine even said, we are going to be the Miss Van der Rohe of the future, you know, because now, and even some of my work has been taken by some universities, and they've added it into their curriculum or into their assignments and all of that. So that then starts to inform for the students to now to see this work that is African, and they can now start to relate to it, and they can start to identify with the work. They don't have to necessarily be from that specific tribe, and they don't have to necessarily even be African, but the minute they can see culture and they can identify with the principle of that culture, they can now draw from their own culture and start to bring that forward instead of prototyping, basically copying other designs that are already there because they are selling or because they are trendy in the market. So I think that creative confidence is what's going to be quite exciting to see playing out, is this young emerging designers who are very confident, because also the institutions have taught them that to be proud and with pride, because the president's study of existing designers who are currently doing ABC, this is what they're doing, you know. So I think that's what makes it quite exciting. So let's start building our own Bauhaus. You're going to, you know, with the blue glasses, you know what you're going to do. So
no, but you know what I love about what you said? You know, that period of the 1930s that brought out the Bauhaus movement, it was a period in Western history where there was so much, there was move from the ornamentation to starting to think about this idea of creating things for everyone. And, you know, and obviously the Second World War changed that. But we are at that period where we're looking at immediate solutions to objects and items. And we might be decades or behind, but this is our time to create those things and to bring them to the world front, you know, and to document them as well so that people can learn from that process. You know, we're still learning from the Bauhaus today. Can you imagine this in another 60, 70 years? We won't be here, you know, but the experiments we're making today is going to inform generations ahead of us. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I always say also it's a mix from the Bauhaus and the mix from our traditional cultures. So we are not bashing and saying we don't want anything to do with this. We're saying we've learned this in school. This is what actually drove us to come into design school, because this is what we saw and we related to it. But we're saying we can bring something that has been hidden or that has been looked down on, and we can bring it up with the same, like this, as with the Bauhaus and basically our cultures head to head like this, and it could create a new era of design that we don't even, like, sometimes even saying African design, sometimes even saying modernizing African design, it's like, I just always say, like, we are contributing to. We are just contributing to, because sometimes even the terms can start to get tricky. You know, people are like, what is African design? Is it just only when it has patterns? Is it this? We are contributing to.
I love that phrase, creative confidence. I think that's just like, and you can feel this like energy from all of you, this kind of excitement to be working right now and kind of at this like it feels like on the cusp of the next thing. And it's such a treat to be able to see your faces too. But I'm so excited to see what's next. And now I'm feeling like energized. I'm feeling good. Yes.
Well, thank
really
you
nice.
for having us.
Such a
and
pleasure.
Thank you
And
so much.
I'll be in touch soon too, directly about next week and the timing and all of that great stuff. But thank you so much for taking the time today. And it's been so nice.
It's been fun. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be in touch with all of you because I'm inspired.
We
by
need
all
to talk. We need to
Yeah,
talk.
We need to talk for sure. Yeah, also exciting. Also exciting.
Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you, Prue. She hasn't said
Yes,
anything,
thank
but we
you,
know she's
Prue.
here.
We see you.
Thank you guys. That was great.